Support for Flying Valiant Builds is brought to you by 1st and 64th Customs on YouTube, where no diecast is safe. Video Geek Productions, all business, all geek. Brian Smith YouTube channel, clever schemes for fun and profit. A generous grant from the Jonathan Vonesh Foundation, and from support from viewers like you. Please like, share, and subscribe. Alright, not only are we going to paint this one pink, we're going to set a world record. Hey there folks, Chuck here, and welcome to my Paint It Pink challenge on episode 20. This one was an interesting one. I almost didn't participate in this challenge, not because I didn't want to, but just because I had a lot going on and I didn't really have a good idea for a pink build, especially since what I do is very weathering and damage and junk based. So I couldn't really come up with a good pink idea. And then I learned a little bit about this wonderful UK artist named Stuart Simple and his feud with Anish Kapoor. And he's the guy that created that mirrored bean in Chicago. The Anish Kapoor guy is, not Stuart Simple. Anyway, there's a really interesting feud there, and there's like way too much story to get into. But basically, Anish Kapoor bought the rights to the world's blackest black paint or pigment, and nobody else in the world can use it except for him. And so Stuart Simple created the world's pinkest pink, and everyone in the world can use it except Anish Kapoor. And I think that's very funny. And I love extremes, I love bold colors, and I love doing things for spite. So I had to get myself a bottle of this stuff. And once I had a bottle of it, I realized I needed to use it for something. And fortunately, not only is this the Paint It Pink challenge, but it is also day 17 of Stuart Simple's Pinktober campaign, which is a really cool idea, and there's a whole lot of interesting spite behind that as well, and I'll link to that in the description below. But basically the theme for today's Pinktober is paint. So here I am with pink paint on the pink paint day for the pink paint challenge. So how could I say no? The trick for me was coming up with a good casting to use. I had a few ideas in mind. So I decided to take some of the cars from the nice folks that have sent me stuff over the last few weeks, Wade, Brian, 2AHD Cat, a few other people, and put it up for a vote. And this was the vehicle that my patrons chose almost unanimously. I thought this was interesting. It's, very early 90s and screams for kind of a Miami Vice, almost cyberpunk kind of thing. So I decided, if I'm going to do this, I'm going to go all in. And if I've got the world's pinkest pink, then I am going to make the world's pinkest Hot Wheels car. And I'm going to put it up for auction, and all of the money from the sale is going to go to the American Cancer Society, and specifically a friend of a friend's fundraiser that is being done for the American Cancer Society. They have a lot of great causes, and I'm really honored to support them. So you'll find a link to the auction for this vehicle on eBay in the description below. So if you like this and this is your thing and you like the idea of owning the world's pinkest diecast car, then this is going to be the auction for you. So let's get to the breakdown. So the rules for the Paint It Pink challenge were pretty basic. Basically, take any casting you want and make it pink. My first point for this breakdown was my patrons would choose the casting, and then I would make it pink. Really pink. World record pink. And because I wanted to try something different, I was going to make it shiny. And then I was going to make it glow. More on that in a minute. Ready? Punch that subscribe button. Let's boogie. Alright, the breakdown on this one was kind of interesting because you have that front chrome piece, and instead of more current models where the chrome piece would be part of a chrome interior, it was completely separate from the rest of the casting, which was actually really handy. Strip down was pretty straightforward. First and foremost, get rid of that nub steering wheel, put in a 3D printed one. Shout out to King Size Customs. Thank you for giving me a shout out on your channel for the 3D steering wheels I sent you. I'm slowly getting more proactive with my chassis. I remembered that most of these Hot Wheels have that axle protecting weird half circle thing on the bottom of the chassis, so I took those off first and filed everything smooth. And this was exciting for me. This goes way back to when I first was getting started on this early this year. These LODC wheels I actually won way back before I had even released my first video. It was the first time I ever won anything off of Instagram, and a really nice chap, Angel Rod, and I'll link to his Instagram, released this giveaway. He was starting in dealing with these LODC wheels and offered a giveaway competition, and I did that whole thing where you post the picture and you tag some people, and he had his kid pick the winner, and surprise, surprise, they picked me. And I was just like, oh, well, this is wild, and kind of a sign that maybe I should continue giving this a try. So check him out at Angel Rod Art on Instagram, and at 637 Collectibles. His name is Jason. He's a good guy, and I'm really excited to finally be able to use these all this time later. I had never used fancy wheels like this before. They're really not the kind of wheels that I usually use. They're usually more utilitarian steel wheel or, 70s custom wheels. So I was glad for this challenge because this was the perfect vehicle to use this type of wheel set on. And they fit really well. It was pretty easy to cut the axles to fit. I didn't have to do any modifications to the chassis to get the axles to fit, and it still rolls pretty decently. If anything, I wish the wheels were a little bit bigger, or the tires were a little bit bigger, but I'm working with what I got. And I liked that they had this interesting disc insert inside them to give the hint of disc brakes. Again, I'm getting slightly more proactive with at least checking to see that the wheels fit before getting deep into the build and realizing that I've never bothered to see if the wheels even work with the kind of setup I'm doing. I'm back to using the Autoborn sealer as my primer base. I love this stuff. It's just, you have to make sure that you A, put the thinner in first, and B, keep that pressure high. I'm running 30 psi through here, running a little bit, like maybe a quarter, like a 1:4 mix thinner and then sealer with a little flow improver. Did a pledge floor dip for the windshield, and things get a little complicated with the windshield after that, but more on that in a minute. I know it's kind of funny to strip the chrome off and then paint the mirror chrome paint on, but I still think this is a way better look than the actual chrome from the original, and it's a good base for what I'm doing next. So this stuff is interesting. So you saw that I wanted to make it glow in the breakdown, and another thing that I picked up from Culture Hustle, which is fun to say. I don't know why that's so hard to say. Culture Hustle. Anyway, they sell these pigment pots called Lit, and they are reportedly the most powerful glow-in-the-dark pigments that you can get. And I'm inclined to agree with them. I've got some other glow-in-the-dark paints I'm going to do an A/B test to in a future video. I think that would be kind of a fun test. So the trick with these is you mix them with some kind of base, and I bought some of his acrylic base as well because I was trying to get to free shipping, and mix it with a little water, and I must have been doing something wrong because I was having a really hard time getting this to a good consistency. But I think that was just me because I was working with a very small quantity, and it's hard. Like, they give a mixture ratio of 5 parts pigment to 2 parts water to 2 parts base, and it's really hard to do that at a very small quantity. But I messed with it, and I got some stuff that was workable. It was a lot of mixing and trial and error, and I eventually ended up with something that worked. But the plan was to make the body of the car the world's pinkest pink potion, which is the pigment mixed with the base that they sell all ready to go, and to make the interior and the wheel openings with the world's pinkest glow-in-the-dark base. So not only are we doing the world's pinkest pink, but we're also doing the world's glowiest pink at the same time. So you can see I'm doing a lot of mixing and trial and error here, and yeah, it was a mess. But I ended up pretty happy with the results. It was a little textured because I did go a bit pigment heavy, but I think that lends well to the interior once it's all said and done. Now it's time for the good stuff. This is it, the potion bottle for the world's pinkest pink. I was a little apprehensive using it because nobody had mentioned on the website anything about airbrushing, but after a little experimentation with the Vallejo thinner and flow improver, I was pleasantly surprised at how easily it sprayed. It laid on very well. Again, I was using a pretty high PSI here, and I went slowly and used several thin coats, but this stuff laid very well, and by the time I was laying the second or third layer of pink on, it was pretty obvious that this thing was really going to pop. I mean, in person, this thing is wild how much it glows. And I covered it with some Vallejo clear. I think I ended up using 6 coats of Vallejo glossy clear by the time it was all done. Then it was time to do some details on the interior. While I did want it to be the world's pinkest pink car, I also wanted it to have a little bit of detail. So I put a little AK Interactive varnished wood on the center console and on the steering wheel so that there would be a little definition in there. And because this car was so bold and out there, I decided to do something a little different with my headlights, and that's where this metal medium comes in. This is an acrylic resin from Vallejo that you can mix with any acrylic paint, and it makes it metallic. And I decided to mix it with my headlight color of choice, Oyster White, to kind of give it a next level headlight appearance. And it was very interesting. It did kind of create a pearlescent look to the white, which I actually kind of liked for the headlights, and I might use it on future projects. I used some of Alvarez's preferred Nuln oil to lay in on the grill to have the grill lines stand out. The trick here that I'm learning is that while the mirror paint is amazing, if you use something like the black panel liner paint from AK Interactive that's also oil-based, it will dissolve the oil-based mirror paint. It's very easy to reactivate that paint. So if you're going to do a wash over, and this is just a good rule of thumb in general, if you're going to do a wash over paint, if it's an acrylic paint, use an oil-based wash. If it's an oil-based paint, use a water-based wash, and the Nuln oil is a water-based wash, and a very good one too. So I am using it for the mirror paint, and that does a really good job of getting the creases and stuff without reactivating the paint. You keep the shininess of the mirror without sacrificing the metallic look or the details from getting a wash over it. And speaking of washes, I decided to give the interior a little bit of a red shade from the Army Painter shade kit that I bought in a previous video. I'll link to that in the description. I ended up not caring for it as much as I thought I would, so I wiped off most of it. It was really tough because this paint was really textured, so any wash I was going to add was really going to draw out the texture, and I didn't really want to do that. So I'm kind of new to doing shiny paint jobs, as you may have seen from my other videos, so I was experimenting a bit with wet sanding here. I started with a 2500 grit and worked my way up to a 7000 grit and used some flitz polish here and there, and it seemed to do a pretty good job. I ended up relatively happy. There was one part on one of the wheel well openings where I ended up sanding through, but other than that, the paint job turned out really well, and I was able to touch up the fender well and buff it in. It's very hard to tell that there was ever a sand through there. The flitz polish was impressive. I'm very happy with how that worked. I'm definitely going to keep that one in my arsenal. I think Jim Silva or Paul over at Fat Guy Productions turned me on to flitz. I can't remember who. The wet sanding did do a really good job as well, but the flitz was much more easy to control. It's a good final step. The only problem is that it does get into your nooks and crannies, so you have to be very careful to get it out of any panel lines that you might have on the body. And speaking of the metallizer, once I had the rest of the grill dried, I used a little acrylic orange paint with the metallizer to create a bolder turn signal amber than my typical Tester's oil-based one, and I was pretty happy with how that turned out. I might end up mixing a larger batch of that and saving it in the paint pot for later. This metallizer stuff is really interesting to work with. It's definitely not something you can just like dive in and do, but experimenting with ratios and stuff, you can come up with just about any metallic paint that you want, I'm sure. At least in acrylic paints. Then it was time to buff up the chassis. I was a little nervous with the chassis because it was plastic, so I used only flitz on that part of the car. And it worked out pretty well. Not wanting the chassis to just be a sea of pink, I decided to go over it with some MSP True Silver. It's kind of hard to decide what to do with the chassis, but I figured the way it's laid out, there's really not a clear delineation between the underside of the car and the side of the car, so I just decided to keep the bulk of it all pink. Once the turn signals were dry, I went over them with the wet effects from AK Interactive. And then it was time to go over the body with the black panel liner from AK Interactive. It did a great job of helping the panels stand out and the details on the chassis stand out, and then just went around with a Q-tip with one end dipped in thinner and one dry, so I could use a little bit of the thinner if a dry Q-tip didn't take it off, but most of it came off pretty easily. Again, using the acrylic paint and the acrylic clear, doing an oil-based wash made it very easy to work on top of without worrying about reactivating the paint underneath it. I do, in hindsight, wish I had done maybe a lighter color, but I didn't want to do brown with pink. I thought it would look gross, so I stuck with black. Again, the Stuart Simple Culture Hustle mirror paint was used, and see, here's where I learn a lesson the hard way. I think, I've got this mirror paint, I'm going to put the mirror paint down, and then I'm going to put the tester's red clear on top of it, and it's going to look great. Forgetting, of course, that the tester's red paint is also oil-based, and that it's going to reactivate. But more on that in a minute. I do think this is the one thing that the Malta pen has on the mirror paint, is I don't recall it reactivating as easily as this mirror paint if you put oil paint on top of it. But I think this will be relatively easy to overcome with maybe an alcohol-based ink or something like that instead of the tester's clear red. I mixed up a little more of the pink lit pigment to get the wheel wells on the chassis and some other key areas that I wanted to glow with glow-in-the-dark paint. Again, it was kind of a hot mess to work with, but I blame myself on the mix more than anything else. This is one of those weird times where I actually wanted the underside of the chassis to stand out, so I painted it with the lit paint as well. Once the taillights were dry, I went over them with the wet effects, which really helped them have kind of a layer of depth. Looking at all my reference photos of the Mercedes SL500, they all had tinted windows, and specifically the convertibles had these tinted stripes along the top of the windshield, and I got an idea that I wanted to try. I was not happy with the windshield. It had some waver to it, and I tried polishing it out, and it didn't exactly come out as ideal as I would have liked, but I wanted to try seeing if I could recreate the tint strip, and it kind of has a soft edge to it, and I got this weird idea, and it kind of worked out. I used some Pledge Floor polish and some alcohol-based carbon black ink and mixed it together and dipped the windshield in, did some dab off, and then held it upside down. The surface tension on the ink created this line at the top that actually looks a lot like a tint strip, and the rest of it tinted the window a little bit. I'm not super thrilled with it, but it was okay for what I had in my time constraints, and it was definitely better looking than just the plain window. There was this bit of ugliness over the trunk, like that was where the casting was held or something, and I should have polished it out when it was in raw, but I forgot to, so I used this half-round styrene and super glued it in place, and then just went over it with some more of the mirror paint to make it look like a trim panel for the license plate area. Then once I got everything back together, it was time to finish things up. Mirror paint for the license plate cover, and I was definitely feeling a Florida vibe with this car as a native Floridian, so I found an early 90s license plate from Florida, cleaned it up in Photoshop, gave it an appropriate county, printed it out on some glossy photo paper, and fixed it with a little PVA glue. And it was time to set the decal and give it the official designation as build number 20. So before the final reveal, let's take a look at where we started. This vintage 1991 Mercedes SL500 that I got from my incredibly generous and talented patron Brian Smith, whose channel you should subscribe to. He updates sporadically, but he's always up to some amazing stuff. You should definitely check out his channel. And let's see where this would-be world record holder ends up. So there it is. It is very pink, and I think it turned out pretty well for what I was going for. It definitely has an early 90s South Florida vibe to it. But now it's time for the extra fun reveal. Here's how it looks with regular lighting and a little bit of UV light. And here's how it looks under just a UV light. And this is where the pink really stands out. Oh, and remember the part of the car that's painted in glow-in-the-dark paint? Well, here's how this thing looks after dark. Yeah, this thing really glows. This stuff is impressive. It doesn't even have to be in total darkness for it to glow. Like I said, I'm going to do a comparison test. I've got some glow-in-the-dark craft paint that I want to test up against this just to see how much brighter this stuff is, but it is pretty bright as far as glow-in-the-dark pigments go. I was quite impressed. So, yeah, that's my Paint It Pink build for the Paint It Pink challenge, And again, if this thing is your cup of tea and you want to have the world's pinkest car, allegedly, I don't know if it's really the world's pinkest car, but I don't know of anybody else who's painted a car with the alleged world's pinkest pink, so I think it's pretty safe to say this is the world's pinkest Hot Wheels car for sure. And you want to have it sitting on your shelf and support a good cause, I'm going to have this up on eBay, and you can check the link in the description for the world's pinkest pink Hot Wheels car. And all of the proceeds from that sale are going to go to the American Cancer Society. If you like this or some of my other builds and you want to buy one or order a commission from me, you can always email me at flyingvaliant@gmail.com. As you saw at the beginning of the show, I've got some amazing presenting sponsors in my Bandit level patrons, but I've also got the Rockford level patrons, which are Mid-Island Custom Diecast. Thank you, Evan. Check out his channel and subscribe. My amazing wife, Carolyn, who is officially starting tutoring full-time, so check her out. You can email me at flyingvaliant@gmail.com if you want to know more about her math tutoring services. She does it all over Zoom. You can also check out my Douglas level patrons at Drew Ranson Raves Podcast, Jordan Kleinhenn, and the Curtis Crafts YouTube channel. Thank you all for your generous support. These paint supplies were all purchased by proceeds from my Patreon. I really appreciate it. That's how I can continue to do this show and continue to try new things for this channel. And I've got some new stuff that I'm going to try thanks to them that I think we're all going to enjoy. So that's one way you can support the show. You can also get some merch over at our merch store. I'll link to that in the description below, or you can check out J.E. Peg Design on TeePublic. You can get these really cool stickers. I just picked up a few of these. There's t-shirts, there's masks, like this one. I just got the new logo on a t-shirt that I really like. It's a cool way to show your support for the channel, and all the proceeds from that go to my brother Justin, who generously provides all the designs for the show. Again, if you like what you saw, please subscribe, like the video, leave me a comment about what you think of the world's pinkest Hot Wheels car. And if you want to see me do anything different with this pink paint, I'd be eager to hear your ideas. You can always get more shots of my builds over at Flying Valiant or on my Patreon page. There's a lot of extra stuff. I get behind the scenes on some of my builds. You get previews of stuff before it comes out. And there's always a monthly giveaway. I would like to thank the folks that put this all together. That includes the Three Blind Mice, the Four Horsemen, the Beefeaters, and Marty's Matchbox Makeovers. Thank you all for hosting this amazing event. This was really cool, and it was neat to see all these different groups come together for a very important cause. And I'm glad to see that there are other people that are auctioning off their builds for charity. So check them out and watch their videos and like and subscribe to all the different builders. It's a really cool thing being a part of this group, and really nice to be working with a bunch of really talented builders. As always, I can't thank you enough for coming along with me for the ride. I really appreciate it. And I got another build coming up next week. So until next time, stay fresh, cheese bags.